Welcome to the first International Elevator Industry Update 2021. Get in and be safe to hear about the newest trends inside the elevator industry. Let's welcome our host, Mr. Achim Hütter, Chairman of the VFA Interlift.
Yes, thank you for the introduction and hello to everybody who is taking part in our first live stream event of the Elevator Industry Survey. We will try to limit this to 30 minutes and make it rather quick to really present you the essence of the results. These surveys are a joint effort of the trade magazine Elevator World, the trade show company AFAC, the German Elevator Association VFA Interlift, in cooperation with Credit Suisse. And for the third edition, we decided to add a live stream to the report, which is, as usual, downloadable from the websites of Elevator World and VFA Interlift.de. What is the reason behind it? After 3 quarters, we wanted to add some comparison and showing trends, and additionally we will, if time allows, take questions at the end of the session, which you can forward to questions@vfa-interlift.de as the link is shown on the screen. So if you have any questions to one of the presentations, please send us a quick email and we will try to answer that at the end of the session. The first part of this session will be, or this presentation will be made by Andre Kuknin on the latest findings of our Q4 survey. Andre is an equity research analyst at Credit Suisse, and in that capacity he's following the elevator industry for an exceptionally long time already. This is followed by a short comparison of the Q2 to Q4 2020 surveys. It's presented by me. I'm the chairman of the German Elevator Association, VFA. I was born in an elevator hoistway into a 4th generation elevator family, and so I too have been in this industry for a quite long time. Henning Könnecke, CEO of AFAC, will close the session with a view to the lift-related events in 2021, and at the end we will take question and give some answers. So I think we will dive right into it, and we will start with Andre for the first part of this live stream. So Andre, please, I welcome you here, and please start your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Achim, and welcome everyone to this event. It's really exciting for me to be here in front of you, presenting the results of the survey. It really has been an honor for us at Credit Suisse to be able to run this survey together with AFAG and VFA Interlift, and of course with Elevator World, leading publication in the press and in the trade. To be able to see the results, to be able to really dig through them in detail, to really understand how the industry thinks about the current situation, what are the key factors that affect the industry, and what are the thoughts on the outlook. So the plan for me is to run you through the current situation and outlook and the key factors that we think determine the company's performance. I'll also then touch on a few broader areas of discussion from kind of investor perspective, from view from the city type perspective that are important for the elevator industry. And then I'll pass over back to Achim to demonstrate how the survey results have evolved since we started running it in the middle of last year. So with this, if we launch into the next slide. That's the plan for today, and then we go further. So I'll start with the assessment of the current situation. We asked questions about how do you assess the current situation, whether it's become better or worse or hasn't changed. To keep it very simple and keep it very clear. The way we chose to present these results is as a diffusion index, i.e. we take the positive responses and we give them a weighting of 100, and we give neutral responses and give them a weighting of 50, and negatives get 0. So if nothing is changing, then we're at 50. So 50 kind of means neutral, stable. And obviously it can be as positive as 100 or as negative as 0 in very rare occasions. You may have seen something similar to that in PMI industry surveys, the kind of indicators for general economic activity. And we presented it the same way here. Another way to look at it is the balance of positive versus negative responses, which we can also touch on. And I think Akim will explore in more detail in his slides. So what is the survey saying in terms of the current situation? It is positive. So the response is 64, so clearly above 50. So the positive responses clearly outweigh the negatives. And that's visible in the chart on the left-hand side. Geographically, the most positive regions are Germany and North America, but we're also in solid positive in China and Europe outside of Germany. We are still pointing to a contraction in Asia, excluding China, as you can see on the left-hand side of that chart, and Middle East and South America. We also slice it in terms of the supply chain participants. That's the right-hand side chart. That's the same survey responses, but instead of breaking them up geographically, we break them up by type of respondents. So we can see the whole of supply chain here, from the component makers to manufacturers of elevators and service providers. And obviously we also here include consultants and industry associations. And you can see how universally consistent that result is across pretty much the entire supply chain, with exception of industry associations, where it's positive pointing to a clear above 60 reading. If we then go to next slide and think about the limiting factors that the survey highlighted, and the ranges of answers we gave here are on the left-hand side chart. And here what we can see is that, unsurprisingly, it's the uncertainty over economic policy in general that has been cited as the key limiting factor for the industry. We'd also highlight that the insufficient demand and financial constraints have actually diminished in importance over time compared to the middle of last year, pointing to a positive development. But shortages of labor force have continued to be second highest factor, or our second highest factor. And also we noticed the shortage of material and equipment starting to edge up, which is maybe indicative of some tightening in the supply chain as the world has recovered and demand has picked up. So when we look at the kind of assessment of the current situation of these across these two slides, it's clearly positive, and I would say it's quite consistent with what we're hearing from other construction market participants and services providers into buildings that we speak to. If we go to next slide, there we'll be talking about the outlook pictures, where we ask questions about, or the question is about, how do you expect the economic activity to develop over the next 6 months. I think this is very interesting because here the overall picture is clearly more cautious than the responses in the current situation. So what we see is respondents highlighting that in last 3 months things were clearly on a positive trajectory, but they don't appear to expect that to continue over the next 6 months. If we look at the diffusion index here, or kind of the optimism index as we called it, it is just below 50. So it's basically pointing to a roughly stable outlook for next 6 months. And if we look at it more across geographies, then you can see North America and Asia ex-China in the positive territory. Germany is more or less neutral, and the most negative ones are really Middle East and China on the left-hand side, whereas South America and Europe outside of Germany is kind of moderately cautious. And you can see how kind of consistent this response rate is also across the kind of major pieces of supply chain, where kind of manufacturers and service providers are clicking maybe just below that 50 neutral benchmark, and component suppliers are a bit more on the positive, and then consultants being most positive versus associations most negative. What is our take on this is that clearly this is a conservative industry, and it's understandable to us, given it's an industry that's responsible for moving billions of people a day in a very kind of confined spaces vertically. And we are still, I think, learning from the responses and kind of comparing this survey to final outcomes on how do we calibrate these responses on outlook versus the for the natural conservativeness of the industry. If we also look at the next slide, slide 6, there's another way to think about kind of forward outlook in our view is to ask about hiring intentions. And on this side, as you can see on the slide, there's a lot more columns, sorry, that have reached above 50, are you pointing to growth? And that picture is a lot more consistent with the current situation. So we think the real kind of outlook is somewhere in between of what the respondents said outright about the prospects for their businesses for the next 6 months, and maybe what they intend to do with their hiring intentions. And if we look at that in a bit more detail, then globally, clearly the intentions to increase headcount are outweighing those that are planning to reduce. So this is all the columns that score above 50. That's the case there. The most positives are clearly on the right-hand side, with Germany and Europe more broadly, but also North America. So you can see some quite sort of consistent trends here as well versus the previous picture, and clearly more negative in Middle East and China, which again also correlates with what we discussed on the prior slide. Looking at the supply chain here, again, pretty consistent across service providers, component makers, OEMs, and consultants, and the industry association responses are also quite consistent with the prints that they gave in the prior responses, being clearly on the more conservative and more cautious side across the board. So in terms of outlook overall, we would highlight North America as scoring clearly positively and improving. We can see that from the kind of assessment of current situation, but also from outlook answer and the hiring intentions, and generally improving situation in Europe overall, and Asia ex-China, where we're not surprised with Asia ex-China, given there's some clearly countries in there that stayed in the lockdown for a reasonably long time during 2020, and there was Q4 really where we started to see first steps towards unlocking, and hence it's natural to expect to see expectations of improvement there. I think also China, clearly a very large market globally for new equipment and becoming increasingly important for service. We're also not so surprised to see a bit of a moderation in the current sentiment and that kind of more cautious outlook, given in Q4 we saw a number of reintroduced restrictions by the government targeting developers' leverage ratios, and we saw that to a degree reflected in the monthly statistics that China publishes on the construction industry and in particular such sentiment indicators as land purchases. So with this, I'll move on to slide 7. And we're just going to touch on next two slides on two key topics that are competitive environment and raw materials a bit more briefly that we had a chance to ask about in this survey. So on the competitive environment, I find this fascinating that when we asked whether the current competitive environment in your space has toughened or eased or became unchanged, the overwhelming response globally, and you can see it by regions as well, is that the competitive environment is getting tougher. Hence the kind of responses that point to tougher clearly outweigh those that are seeing easing. We are less negative in Germany and North America relatively, but even in those more positive countries or regions, we're severely below 50. So as I say, the tougher responses clearly outweigh the easing. Then we go all the way to very low ratios in China and Middle East. That's where kind of more than 80% of people point to a tougher competitive environment. Again, this is clearly a competitive industry, and we have been flagging this as well in our research. There are many players pushing for market share, that's globally and across segments. The main question to us here is always that whether this leads to price competition or whether that's competitive environment being tougher because there is fast rate of innovation progress with new products being launched or new offers on service or new marketing and geographical expansions by various players. So far, we haven't seen the pricing situation in the industry overall from our kind of other channel checks being as negative as this responses point. But that's why I'm very excited about this survey and kind of building the track record to be able to do this regularly and to compare to what the kind of real world, what the outcomes are, and to calibrate it further. The next slide, 8, links closely to this is the raw materials question. The reason why we included this question first time in this survey is because we had steel prices, spot prices inflation of 30 to 40% at the beginning of this year. So if I take the current spots, compare them to the averages that we've seen over 2020, that's sort of the inflation we have seen. So the question we asked was quite kind of negatively skewed because we don't see the scope for raw materials inflation to be positive. And that talks about how do you assess the risk of rising raw material costs to your business in 2021? And the rate of responses was significantly slightly impacting or neutral. So what was interesting to us is that actually only 20% of the respondents expect a significant negative impact from raw materials in the industry, and the rest expect slight or neutral impact, and about 30% within that are actually neutral. So no impact at all. And you can, and the way we presented it here on the slides is that we assume that if we just arbitrarily take -15 kind of number for significant and -5 for slight, and then obviously 0 for neutral, these are the outcomes here on the charts weighted by the responses we got. So most severe impact is expected in Asia outside of China, then in China, and on the other end of the spectrum in Germany and North America. Obviously, quite a lot goes into this in terms of the impact on raw materials. It's the expectation for spot prices through 2021. It's the expectations for ability to raise your own price or not, and your ability to take costs out and to drive productivity. So we're quite reassured that the industry is not massively alarmed about this inflation in raw materials that we've seen so far. And kind of looking forward to monitoring that closely going forward. With this, I'll go to the next slide, which is my last one. I just wanted to take this opportunity to talk about a couple of topics, or a handful of topics here that are really key to the industry from perspective of investors who I speak to on a daily basis, my clients are institutional investors that look at shares of Kony, Schindler, Otis, and the likes of Shanghai Mechanical and Canny in China, and decide whether to invest in them or not. And this is kind of what we spend a lot of time talking about, apart from the near-term channel checking, finding out what's going on in the industry, is these kind of three big areas of discussion, and then the one that's kind of the fourth one that's emerged is raw materials. And in terms of the first one, what I would just say is that in terms of new equipment, obviously the world behaved very differently across geographies during COVID. Some were impacted more or less by shutdowns, etc. I think now, kind of as we go in the world with COVID or post-COVID, and think about the outlook, then it's really key to think about what does it do to the office space, what does it do to retail, to international travel, and in our view, we don't think the office space is structurally impaired, and we certainly think the elevator content in there should be, if anything, going up, just because of being one of the key enablers of frictionless building. But in retail, that's something that worries us more structurally. And unfortunately, here there's no offsetting factor on the e-commerce side, because that doesn't drive demand for elevators. And on service side, I would just say that this COVID downturn has really put the industry further on the map as one of the most resilient out there in the industrial world. The fact that elevator service was proven to be was deemed system critical across every single country, essentially, with just exception of handful, and hence services were performed more or less unimpacted during this period of shutdowns elsewhere, and hence the company's earnings held up remarkably well. That really marks elevator industry as very strong. On digital adoption and monetization of that, I would just kind of, we presented and discussed this at Interlift with Akim in a lot of detail, and there is the kind of digitalize or die sort of trend across the entire industrial world and buildings world. I think it is applicable for elevators as well, and we're seeing some new players entering, got new technologies being adopted, and obviously the large OEMs pushing for it as well. What I would say is that there is a clear divide right now for the industry, and a real choice, kind of, as we say, it's kind of a fork in the road, is how you monetize IoT, is whether you actually take all of that investment in technology and just look to save your kind of operational costs because it's cheaper to maintain lifts that are connected, or do you drive additional revenues from this as an increased value proposition to the customer, because a lift that is monitored continuously is going to have better uptime. And we obviously welcome the latter, because we think that creates a much more sustainable profit pool for the industry and moves the industry to a more value-added place. And then consolidation is always a topic. Continuously, we obviously had potential for very large piece of consolidation to take place at the beginning of last year. With Thyssen, that didn't happen. Thyssen became owned by a private equity consortium. And we're watching this with interest, because obviously these players, they have holding periods of 3 to 5 years, and then they need to choose what to do next. And this will be the next kind of opportunity to us for anything large to happen. In the meanwhile, we continue to see the trend of large OEMs continuing to buy up the smaller players at kind of a dozen or two pace per annum, as they have been doing continuously for many years. And then finally, on raw materials, we touched on this obviously in the survey context a lot. To us, it's really clearly about the balance of raw materials versus price. And we remember the industry has been generally capable of passing through raw materials inflation up to the end customer. That didn't happen in 2017-18 with the China situation and pricing there versus steel inflation. Our view is that that was exceptional. We do expect the industry price discipline in light of rising raw materials to be there. And that's something that we will be monitoring closely as we go. I think I've gone on for far too long, and with this I'll stop and pass over to Akim and Henning. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Andre. There was a lot of information in a very short time, so thank you very much for that insight. I think there are some very interesting takeaways in there. So if you have any questions to Andre, see the link above, questions@vfa-interlift.de will bring you to us, and we will answer questions at the end of the session. So, and then I will continue with a short comparison. We'll make up some time, hopefully, but gonna dive right into it. And first slide, please. So first of all, I wanted to tell you where does the participants of the survey come from. Of course, most of our data is in Europe. That's why 65% of the participants are from here, 15 from North America, China 8, and the rest is 12%. We are working on getting more participants in all areas of the world to level up the participants a bit. Obviously that takes time, but that's one of the goals for the future. Next slide, please. So then where do the participants come from? Which industry sector working in? There we have a quite good level of manufacturer, service providers and component, quite leveled, some consultants and others as associations and homeowners, for example. Let me tell you how I approached this comparison. I took all the three results of the quarter and then looked at every question and the evolvement, and I show you here like the typical comparison we have for all of the questions. This is the first question we have, and you see clearly that over all 3 quarters we have a very great improvement towards the economical situation. I then put this into perspective and have several regions compared. If this is only an overall figure, but is it also consistent in the regions? For China, we only have 2 quarters because in the first quarter we didn't have enough participants. But also here you see that the situation improved, and the same you can see for North America and Europe. And especially I wanted to point out the North American figure in Q4. This is really extremely positive. Almost 60% are saying that the economical situation is good, and only 16 on the bad side. So that's quite interesting. And I used this approach to all of the questions, but I only will present something when I find something which is not as consistent as it is here for the first question. I did the same, of course, for the supply chain. The component suppliers are in line, the manufacturers are in line, and the service providers, they all are looking into a much better situation from quarter to quarter. Next slide, please. I then went to this question about the competitive environment. Do you find it tougher and changed or easier? Which is quite consistent from Q3 to Q4 if you look at the general figures. But 2 regions which will stick out here is that China went from 73% tougher to 87% tougher. I think this is was also indicated in Andre's presentation, where he said that China has a bit has suffered longer. And the same is also true for South America, where the tougher raises from 47 to 62. Next slide, please. This is also seen here for the it's a different approach here, showing the competitive environment. And here you see that the number for China increasing the number. Sorry, I forgot to change the headline. This is not about the competitive environment. This is about employment rates. And here you can see that the employment is is drastically going down. The decrease is drastically going down, improved a lot all over the place, and we have seen that in Andre's slide as well. But in China, we have an increase in the numbers of who want to decrease the number of staff from 27 to 31 was already in the beginning a high number and got even higher. That is absolutely against the trend worldwide. And then we have the question of the economical situation for the next 6 months. Here, the first 2 quarters are consistent in the unfavorable mentioning, but there was already an improvement in favorable. But you can see the continuous development in Q4. I already mentioned that in North America, they decreased unfavorable by 10%, almost 10% from 29 to 20, and increased favorable from 22 to 29, which is almost 5% more than in general. And on the opposite, Germany was 14% unfavorable, went to 21. Next slide, please. To finalize my presentation, I just wanted to have a few words about how we're going to continue. I mentioned in the beginning, we will increase the number of the participants, and we will improve the regions. We will try to provide more detailed market data, maybe go on not only on country level to give more information. And we all ask you to help us to support the survey, because we think it's for the benefit of the whole industry. Thank you very much. And I now will pass over to Henning, who will present us the LIFT events in 2021. There he is already. Henning, you are on.
Thank you, Achim, and thank you for the very interesting facts about the comparison of our last service. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and I'm very happy to see you here in a digital event, but hopefully next time we can meet each other once again in person. And therefore I will tell you something about the lift-related events we can see in 2021. My name is Henning König and I'm the CEO of AFAC. We are the organizers of Interlift since 1991, and so we can tell you something about the lift-related events in 2021. So hopefully we can meet once again in person, and on my first slide you can see why this information for you and for us all is so important. Of course, as you all know, due to the pandemic situation of COVID-19, we had no international lift event since nearly 1 year, and so no chance to meet new people and new personal interaction, and also no chance for a personal knowledge transfer, which is very important, not only to the elevator branch, but it's just for us as humans. The personal interaction is a very important fact. And so I just can tell you to start planning your timetable for 2021 now. On my next slide, you can see the first half of the year 2021. And of course, you see a little star at the end of this sentence. This information I provide to you is, of course, without guarantee. You know about the pandemic situation. I cannot guarantee that every event will take place in person. Maybe some events are also switched into a virtual one. The first of these you can see in March, the Global Lift and Escalator Expo. This will be a virtual event. This is a new one organized by an Indian organizer, as well as the second event. This will be in real life, once again, the Elevator and Escalator Expo, starting in the beginning of April. Very important for the European market is the Eurolift taking place in Kielce in Poland, which will be at the end of April, also as a live and personal event. At the beginning of May, we have once again a new event in India, ISEE Expo, International Sourcing Expo. And this one is also a new one. And as you see, due to the market in India, the first 3 events will take place in India. And so this will be for the event branch a very important country. At the end of May, you can see Askentech. This is a small show in Greece, but for the Greek market also very interesting. And to finish up the first half of the year, we have the Russian Elevator Week, which is quite known to many lift experts. But now we can switch on to the next slide, and there we have the second half of this year, and there will be really important and interesting events where you should really take part. It's starting at the beginning of July with the Lift City Expo. This is the one in Egypt, and after that we have 2 exhibitions in Turkey. The first one is the Asansör Istanbul, a very traditional fair, at the beginning of July, and in the beginning of September we have the second show in Turkey. The Eurasia Asansör will take place also in person. At the end of September we have the NIC convention. This is one very important show for the American market and the American sector, so don't miss it. And of course I have to say that, but that's also my personal opinion, the highlight of the event year we will have in the second half of October, the Interlift in Augsburg, Germany. I can give you some more facts about that in my ongoing presentation. At the end of the year, we have the Global Lift and Escalator Expo in Dakar in November. And there's a new show in Vietnam, I can tell you, at the beginning of December. And our cooperation partner, Elevator World, will go on with a series of the International Elevator and Escalator Symposium. The next one will take place at the beginning of December, this time in Amsterdam. So this is also very important for your knowledge rising. So, and if we move on to the next slide, you can see, of course, our event, and the most important event also for the lift branch in the whole world. It's the Interlift in Augsburg. This year from 19th to 22nd of October. And on the next slide, I can give you some facts about the latest status of the event. Interlift will be the first real international event on the elevator industry after the pandemic shut down. So don't miss to be there, and don't miss to get your connections at Interlift, as you also used it maybe the last years. It takes place in Augsburg, Germany, and the sponsor, of course, of this event since the beginning is the VFA Interlift. At the moment, in January this year, we have over 300 exhibitors already from 22 countries, and they are registered until now. And in total, we expect over 500 exhibitors and 15,000 specialized visitors to join our event. The visitors are one very, very important fact. At Interlift, we can deliver you a very high percentage of decision makers in our visitors groups. And this number is also rising, and we are very, very sure that for this year, due to COVID, not everybody will be allowed to go on an international travel. So the international specialists you will meet at Interlift, these are very, very high-level decision makers. The Interlift 21 takes place, of course, under a very strict hygiene concept, and this hygiene concept is also checked up with the German government, and also, of course, we have to do that. It is inspected by the German authorities, and so we can guarantee you a very safe event. On my next slide, you can see the international exhibitors coming to Interlift. This is the status now in January. And as you can see, the most exhibitors are coming from Germany and from Italy and Spain. Turkey is very important for us, but also the Asian countries, of course, China, are participating at Interlift. And so just to show you how international also the Interlift 21 will be. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, let me go on and let me finish with my last slide. just some impressions. You see the personal contact and the meeting at Interlift. That is the thing that is in focus and the most important you have at this trade fair. You can see it in these pictures. And also on the next slide, just a small impression about the historic Augsburg and the very modern and high-tech Interlift taking place there. So hopefully we all can meet there, and I thank you for your attention and pass back to Achim, and hopefully we have many questions on the interesting topics of today.
Henning, thank you very much for your presentation. Yes, I think everybody hopes that we will be able to meet in person in a very short time. The shorter, the better. We have been a little over the time limit, so I think I will just take one or two questions, but I can promise that we're going to answer all the questions then in writing. One question is for Andre, and the question is, how do you see the future for smaller, medium, and medium enterprises and the component industry in the lift sector?
So for small and medium service providers, the digital adoption and implementation of connected devices strategies is really key in our view to augment that service offer with remote monitoring, with ability to provide customers with more information about their equipment performance and status, and to be able to provide more effective service as you can kind of fix on the first visit more frequently. You can preventatively maintain elevator and avoid issues. On SME component suppliers, here we do have a consolidation trend taking place from the large OEMs perspective. They are on the one hand are becoming more outsourced, so it does kind of depend where exactly you play in the component space, but generally the OEMs globally have been moving more towards making less themselves and buying more. So that's a positive that increases the obviously total addressable market for component suppliers. But at the same time, we have seen kind of consolidation of purchasing by the large OEMs with fewer suppliers to obviously drive the volume economies and volume leverage and to wield higher purchasing power. And what we've also seen is the OEMs consolidating their product offers, so coming up with more global unified platforms for elevators, like we've seen Schindler or Koni recently, but I think Otis is one of the earlier in that, and Thyssen is following. That also leads to more consolidated purchasing of components. So I would say, depending where you are in components, I think digital is still very important, especially if you are in the kind of controller or door space. And I would be very well aware of that trend of OEMs outsourcing more, but at the same time consolidating their purchasing as they become kind of more unified globally themselves.
Thank you, Andre. We have another question from John Koschek. I mean, he actually put 4 questions in, but I think we limit to 2 and we will answer the rest in writing. The question is, does other trades have similar surveys? I don't know exactly, but I'm pretty sure. I don't know. Andre, Henning, do you know? Is there in any other technical related housing and technical real estate, is there any similar surveys?
So there are lighting surveys, and generally in the US, you've got a lot more of this. You've got the General Contractors Association in the US. They run a survey of something similar. I'd say a little bit less detail. I think it's kind of like a really just a monthly pulse survey But in US, you can find more of them across different types of buildings. What we're really excited about with this one is that elevator is actually also one of the longest lead items that go into buildings. So in terms of new equipment trends, if the elevator industry is seeing a pickup in, tendering, ordering, inquiry activities, then that is actually often the lead indicator for anything else. Really, only HVAC, the heating, ventilation, air conditioning, is the only other one that comes kind of close in terms of being as long lead. Many other things that go into buildings go at much kind of shorter notice and with shorter order books. And that's why we're flagging that North American reading in this survey as very interesting, because especially there you've got particularly long lead times on orders to delivery of on average about 3 years. So if the survey is right about the pickup in activity that translates into orders, that's a very interesting potential lead indicator for the whole industry.
Yeah. Or did you compare the elevator survey to the HVAC, or is that impossible due to different questions, or?
So so this is just in the US. I don't think there is much in Europe, and again, it's the reason why we think this is so interesting and useful. In the US, you've also got obviously two major kind of institutes: the American Institute for Architects and the Dodge, who run their kind of momentum index. So those ABI is the kind of famous index for non-residential activity as a lead indicator. Actually dipped down in November and December, having been kind of gradually improving. And that actually on the same basis is, I think, kind of got up to 47. So almost kind of to break even, and then fell down in November, December to now, I think 42, 43. So it would be interesting kind of who's right on this. But Dodge, they have turned a bit more constructive actually on construction industry, forgive the pun, in the last few months. But for Europe, we haven't seen anything yet.
Okay, I think last question, because we are running out of time, but as I said, we will answer all the questions by email. Henning, I have several requirements to ask to explain a little more the hygiene concept. If you can put some words on that, please.
Of course. No problem at all. As professional fair organizer, we are all the time in contact with the required governments, and so we started to develop our hygiene concept at the end of last year, and our idea was to build up a very, very safe event, but an event where you can also have a personal contact and a personal meeting point. And so we started with one fact that is very important also for us. We will have a full registration of all people which are on the fairground at all times. This is also a requirement from our government to know who is on the fairground at what time, and so we have a full registration. The second one is, and that is only what I can tell you, what is the situation now. That can change until October, of course, in many cases. We will have to wear face and mouth coverings, and with these you can be safe on the fairground. On the third point, we will also have very much space in our fairground in Augsburg, and the most important point is that we have the flow of air, the flow of oxygen all the time during our halts, and you will have also at all the time you will have fresh air in the trade fair halls, and so also that is not that's not the problem for COVID-19. So we have also all the time we have fresh air in our trade fair halls. The last point is that we are in contact with all our exhibitors, and everyone will get a special concept from our site, how to build up the booths and how to be safe for everyone, and that also the personnel on the stand and also the exhibitors as well as the visitors can be sure that they have a safe visit of Interlift. And so also all fair booths are constructed in the way that you can be safe at all times. So these are the rough informations about that. And you can find a very detailed hygiene concept from next week on our Interlift website. We put in there 16 to 18 slides only about the hygiene concept, and you can read every detail of that on our website from next week on.
Thank you very much, Henning. I think we end this first live stream here, and thank your participants, Andre, Henning. Thank you for your excellent presentations, and to all of you, be safe, and hope to see you next time. Thank you for being here. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you for having me, and don't hesitate
Thank
to connect.
you.